The wild pushes back. Have you ever noticed how we talk about the world as if it were a finished book? Like every important thing has already been discovered, named, and cataloged in a museum. We've mapped the forests, lit up the night with massive cities, and somewhere along the way, we convinced ourselves that anything dangerous out there is either gone or under our control. But that confidence starts to crack the second you leave the main roads. Out there, the silence feels a lot heavier. For a long time, we labeled certain creatures as extinct, just stories people told when the dark felt a little too close. But lately, it's not just stories coming back, it's evidence. And it looks like the Night Stalkers didn't disappear, they just waited for us to stop looking. 7. The Michigan Dogman, the guardian of the woods. This one actually started as a total joke. Back in 1987, a radio host made up a story about a 7-foot creature with a dog's head roaming the Michigan woods. People laughed, it became a local legend, and that should have been it. But decades later, a logging crew pushed their site into a dead zone in the Upper Peninsula, land that hadn't been touched since the 1800s. They weren't looking for bones, they were just clearing a path when a massive, rotted sinkhole opened up under their lead bulldozer. When the dust settled, they realized they'd dropped straight into a collapsed cavern system. As they lowered their lights into the hole, something stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't on 4 legs, it was on 2. It was broad, covered in thick, dark fur that looked wet under the lights. It didn't run, it didn't panic, it just stood there, staring down the machinery. One of the guys said the worst part wasn't the size, but the way it held its ground, like it understood exactly what they were doing there and didn't appreciate the intrusion. They walked off the job that night and didn't go back. And if you think a cave-dwelling dog is a nightmare, wait until you see what's been breathing under the soil of Wisconsin.
6. The Beast of Bray Road, something beneath the fields. The sightings near Bray Road were always easy to brush off as rural legends. You know, the kind of story about a werewolf that stays just out of reach. But a soil survey team working near a remote farm recently hit something that shouldn't have been there. Their equipment dropped into a hollow space about 20 feet down. When they lowered a GoPro on a cable, they expected to see a limestone cave. Instead, the camera caught movement. Something huge was curled up in a ball in a space that basically shouldn't exist. They thought it was a carcass until they saw the chest moving, slow and heavy. It was breathing. They tried to get a mechanical arm down there to grab a sample, and that's when it woke up. The head lifted, then the shoulders, and the whole frame unfolded in a way that just didn't look natural. It didn't lash out at them, it looked straight into the lens with these piercing blue eyes. Everyone watching the monitor realized the same thing at once. This thing hadn't been trapped, it had been sleeping there on purpose. But while that thing was hiding under a field, a different kind of hunter was being found in the one place no one can survive. 5. Shunka Warakin, the hunter that never left. The Shunka Warakin is a weird one. Native lore describes it as a built-wrong predator, part hyena, part wolf, and incredibly fast. Science ignored it because there were no fossils, but a high-altitude drone pilot scouting for a mountain pass spotted something dark through a crack in a melting glacial ridge. It looked like a body frozen in the ice, perfectly preserved like a museum exhibit. But as the afternoon sun hit that specific spot of the glacier, the ice started to fracture from the inside. Tiny cracks started spidering out, and the surface fogged up from the heat that was coming from the creature itself. The pilot zoomed in just in time to see the fur shift and a pair of eyes snap open. This thing wasn't a fossil, it was a biological battery that had been on pause for thousands of years. And now that the ice is thinning, it's finally drawing its first breath of modern air. And as that predator breaks out of the ice, there's another one in the Arctic that's been watching us the whole time. 4. The Waheela, the one that watches back. The Waheela is supposed to be a clean myth, just a giant white wolf people talk about to scare tourists. But a team of Arctic researchers recently had an encounter that changed everything. They weren't tracking animals, they were surveying an ice formation when their heat-sensitive scanners picked up a massive hotspot inside a solid ice wall. They cut a small window into the ice to see what it was, and they found fresh tracks. Not small ones, massive, heavy prints that were still steaming in the cold. Before they could even move, a huge shape stepped out from behind a pillar of ice. It didn't charge them, it just stood there, totally still, staring at them. It had clean white fur that almost looked unnatural against the cave walls. The crew said the most unsettling part was the eye contact. Most predators blink or look away eventually, but this thing held its gaze for minutes, like it was trying to decide if these humans were even worth the effort of a hunt. It's one thing to face one giant wolf, but it's a whole different story when the entire pack decides to wake up. 3. Dire wolf. Not one, but many. We know dire wolves were real because of the tar pits, but we've always been told they died out 10,000 years ago. Well, a recovery team in the Rockies recently found out that the timeline is a bit off. A massive chunk of a glacier broke away, revealing what looked like a single wolf. But as the ice continued to crumble, they saw more. Dozens of them, an entire pack, locked in place like they'd been frozen mid-sprint. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a scene from a war. When the sun hit the lead wolf, the alpha, it didn't just melt out of the ice, it stood up. No staggering, no confusion, it just shook the frost off its coat and looked around, totally aware of its surroundings. And when the alpha stands up, the rest of the pack isn't far behind. We aren't just looking at one animal, we're looking at a prehistoric army that just got its wake-up call. And if you think a pack of wolves is bad, wait until you see the thing haunting the English coast that can change its own shape. 2. Black shuck, the shape that shouldn't exist. The black shuck has always been the ultimate ghost dog story, a massive hound with glowing eyes appearing on the English coast. Most people thought it was just a legend born out of fear, but a sub-sea crew working on a shipwreck recently started getting some crazy interference on their sonar, massive signal blocks that didn't match any solid object. They sent a remote sub down to check it out, and at first the lights hit nothing but water. Then the water itself started to shift. It looked like a living distortion, almost like a ripple in reality. Slowly, the shape formed into a huge canine-like silhouette, but it wasn't solid meat and bone. It was more like a bioluminescent mimic. It moved around the sub, watching the humans through the glass with 2 concentrated points of blue light. Which brings us to the biggest, oldest nightmare of them all, the one that never needed to hide. 1. Andrew's Arcus, the one we were never meant to find. Andrew's Arcus was supposed to be a 40-million-year-old fossil. It was a 1.5-ton predator that ruled the ancient world, but an industrial team in Mongolia accidentally broke into a sealed pressurized chamber deep underground that hadn't been opened in millions of years. They found the truth. It wasn't a skeleton, it was a living, breathing Andrew's Arcus, and it was absolutely massive. It stood there in the floodlights, its internal organs pulsing with a faint blue glow, a weird adaptation for living in total darkness. This thing didn't survive by hiding from us, it survived because nothing in the history of the world was ever big enough to challenge it. The certainty is breaking. We like to believe that once something is gone, it stays gone, but that only works if we assume we've seen everything there is to see. The Night Stalkers aren't returning. The truth is, they never actually left. We just finally crossed back into their territory. If you want to know what else is hiding in the dark, make sure you're locked in and subscribed, because the next discovery, it might happen a lot closer to home than you think. Thanks for watching.